Do that. Let's begin by getting to the root of the issue. Because if we don't understand what makes a narcissist tick, we'll never understand what truly makes them panic. Now, when we talk about narcissists, most people imagine someone obsessed with their appearance or constantly bragging. That's surface level. The real psychology of narcissism goes much deeper. At its core, narcissism is not confidence. It's compensation. It's not about feeling superior. It's about desperately covering up a gnawing, unrelenting fear of being ordinary, of being unimportant, of being seen for who they really are, without the mask. And that mask, that's everything in them. You see, narcissists build their lives like a stage. Every interaction is a performance. Every relationship a prop. They don't just want to be liked. They need to be worshipped. They don't want mutual respect. They want control. Because deep down, they fear something that most people can handle just finding it being seen as fallible, flawed, and worst of all, replaceable. Now, here's where things get interesting. A narcissist doesn't fear confrontation. In fact, they kind of enjoy it. It gives them a chance to twist the narrative, play the victim, shift the blame. That's a game they've trained for their entire lives. They don't fear anger, criticism, or even being caught in a lie. What they truly fear is exposure. Not public exposure, but personal exposure. When someone sees through their facade and doesn't flinch. When you stop feeding every ego. When you no longer react the way they expect. That's terrifying for them because their power doesn't come from who they are. It comes from how people respond to them. They thrive on attention, whether it's positive or negative. The moment you stop giving them that energy, they start to lose control. Think about it too. The narcissist's identity is not grounded in self-awareness or self-worth. It's fragile, inflated, personal, entirely on the validation of others. Take that away. Do that. And what's left? Emptiness. And they know it. That's why they'll fight so hard to keep you hooked through manipulation, guilt, charm, rage, whatever works. Do that. But if you're grounded, if you've done your own inner work and can see through the act, they can't hook you anymore. This is why the sentence we're building toward later in this talk isn't just a clever comeback. It's a psychological mirror. It shows them exactly what they're afraid to see, someone who is no longer under their spell. And if you think about it from a philosophical perspective, this taps into something ancient and universal. The idea that illusions only have power when we believe in them. Narcissists construct illusions of superiority and invincibility, but once someone sees through those illusions and calmly walks away, they lose their audience. They lose their power. And for them, that's worse than losing a fight. It's being irrelevant. Do that. Here's something most people don't realize. The narcissist's fear isn't rooted in external consequences. It's not what will happen to me. It's what will happen when I'm no longer the center of your reality.
That's the threat.
That's what shakes them to the core. So if you've ever dealt with a narcissist, and I'm willing to bet many of you have, you may have noticed something strange. The moment you stopped chasing their approval, they got nervous. The moment you stopped arguing and simply disengaged, they started to panic. That wasn't weakness on your part. That was power. When you understand their fear, irrelevance, exposure, loss of control, you gain leverage. Not to manipulate, not to retaliate, but to protect your own peace. To step out of their game entirely. The first step to breaking free from a narcissist's influence isn't confrontation. It's clarity. Clarity about who they are, what they need from you, why you no longer have to provide it. And once you see that clearly, you don't need to shout. You don't need to argue. All you have to do is stop playing along. The moment you become immune to their performance is the moment they realize the show is over. That's what they fear. Not your anger, not your distance, your clarity. Because the most terrifying thing to a narcissist isn't being hated. It's being seen. Let's begin by getting to the root of the issue. Because if we don't understand what makes a narcissist tick, we'll never understand what truly makes them panic. Now, when we talk about narcissists, most people imagine someone obsessed with their appearance or constantly bragging. That's surface level. The real psychology of narcissism goes deeper. At its core, narcissism is not confidence. It's compensation. It's not about feeling superior. That's about desperately covering up a gnawing, unrelenting fear of being ordinary, of being unimportant, of being seen for who they really are without the mask. And that mask, that's everything to them. You see, narcissists build their lives like a stage. Every interaction is a performance. Every relationship a prop. They don't just want to be liked. They need to be worshipped. They don't want mutual respect. They want control. Because deep down, they fear something that most people can handle just fine. Being seen as fallible, flawed, and worst of all, replaceable. Now, here's where things get interesting. A narcissist doesn't fear confrontation if they kind of enjoy it. It gives them a chance to twist the narrative, play the victim, shift the blame. That's a game they've trained for their entire lives. They don't fear anger, criticism, or even being caught in a lie. What they truly fear is exposure, not public exposure, but personal exposure. When someone sees through their facade and doesn't flinch, when you stop feeding their ego, when you no longer react the way they expect, that's terrifying for them because their power doesn't come from who they are. It comes from how people respond to them. They thrive on attention, whether it's positive or negative. The moment you stop giving them that energy, they start to lose control. Think about it, you at the narcissist's identity is not grounded in self-awareness or self-worth. It's a fragile, inflated persona built entirely on the validation of others. Take that away. Do that. And what's left? M's left. Emptiness. And they know it. That's why they'll fight so hard to keep you hooked through manipulation, guilt, charm, rage, whatever works. If you're grounded, but if you've done your own inner work and can see through the act, they can't hook you anymore. This is why the sentence we're building toward later in this talk isn't just a clever comeback. It's a psychological mirror. It shows them exactly what they're afraid to see someone who is no longer under their spell. And if you think about it from a philosophical perspective, this taps into something ancient and universal. The idea that illusions only have power when we believe in them. Narcissists construct illusions of superiority and invincibility, but once someone sees through those illusions and calmly walks away, they lose their audience, they lose their power. And for them, that's worse than losing a fight. It's being irrelevant. Here's something most people don't realize: the narcissist's fear isn't rooted in external consequences. It's not. What will happen to me? It's what will happen when I'm no longer the center of your reality. That's the threat. That's what shakes them to the core. So if you've ever dealt with a narcissist, and I'm willing to bet many of you have, you may have noticed something strange. The moment you stopped chasing their approval, they got nervous. The moment you stopped arguing and simply disengaged, they started to panic. That wasn't weakness on your part. That was power. When you understand their fear, irrelevance, exposure, loss of control, you gain leverage. Not to manipulate, not to retaliate, but to protect your own peace, to step out of their game entirely. The first step to breaking free from a narcissist's influences and confrontation is clarity. Clarity about who they are, what they need from you, and why you no longer have to provide it. And once you see that clearly, you don't need to shout, you to argue. All you have to do is stop playing along. The moment you become immune to their performance is the moment they realize the show is over. That's what they fear. Not your anger. Do that. Not your distance, your clarity. Because the most terrifying thing to a narcissist isn't being hated. It's being seen. Here's the moment many have been waiting for. The one sentence that cuts through all the noise, confusion, and manipulation. But before I say it, let me explain why a single sentence can hold so much power, especially against a narcissist. Words shape reality. They're not just sounds or scribbles on a page. They are tools, weapons, shields. And in the battle with a narcissist, a well-chosen phrase is just a response. It's a declaration. It's a boundary. It's a mirror reflecting their true self, one they desperately want to keep hidden. So what's the sentence? It's simple. It goes like this: I see through you, and I'm not afraid. Let's unpack that, because this isn't just about sounding intimidating. This sentence carries a psychological weight that hits the narcissist's core vulnerabilities. First, I see through you. That alone is powerful. It tells them you've peeled back the layers of their carefully constructed facade. You've recognized the act for what it is, a desperate performance designed to manipulate and control. Narcissists rely heavily on illusion, on creating a reality that serves them and keeps others off balance. When someone says, I see through you, it strips away the illusion. It shows them you're not fooled by the charm, the lies, the victimhood. You've recognized their game, and more importantly, you refuse to play. Second, the phrase, and I'm not afraid, is the emotional bombshell. Narcissists want to evoke fear, doubt, or anxiety. They want to keep you on edge because that gives them control. Fear is their currency. When you openly declare that you are not afraid, you cut off their supply. You're teaching them that you're emotionally independent, that their threats and manipulations no longer have power over you. This isn't bravado. It's calm, grounded strength. What makes this sentence so effective is that it combines insight with emotional resilience. It's not just saying, I understand you. It's saying, I understand you, and I'm not going to be controlled by you. That is what truly terrifies a narcissist, because they live in a world of smoke and mirrors, and when someone shines a clear light on them and stands firm without flinching, their entire world threatens to collapse. From a philosophical perspective, this sentence taps into a fundamental truth about human interaction: authenticity is power. Narcissists survive on masks and facades. When you reveal the truth to them, you disrupt their reality. You no longer validate their false identity. Instead, you force them to confront their own vulnerability. And here's another thing to consider. The sentence is a boundary as much as it is a revelation. Saying, I see through you, and I'm not afraid, sets a limit. It tells the narcissist that their usual tactics won't work on you. You're no longer a participant in their game, but an observer who refuses to be manipulated. It's a verbal shield that protects your inner peace and integrity. But this sentence isn't about revenge or humiliation. It's about reclaiming your power with dignity. It's about choosing yourself over their chaos. When you say it, you're not trying to hurt them, you're trying to free yourself. Timing and tone are crucial when delivering this sentence. It should be said calmly, clearly, and with conviction, not shouted or sneered. The goal is to communicate unshakable confidence, not aggression. When you say it, the narcissist sees that you are grounded, unshaken, and most importantly, untouchable. It's also important to remember that this sentence is a tool, not a weapon. Use it as a line in the sand, not a spark for escalation. Sometimes the greatest power lies in silence and calm presence, but when words are needed, this sentence stands tall. Imagine the scene in you're face to face with someone who has tried to control your reality for years. You look them in the eye and say, I see through you, and I'm not afraid. In that moment, everything shifts. The dynamic changes. The narcissist feels exposed, powerless, do that, and uncertainty. They know they can't manipulate you anymore, and that shakes their foundation. So what do you do next? You don't have to follow up with anger or argument. You simply hold your ground. Let that sentence linger in the space between you. A clear and unyielding boundary, because the most profound victory in dealing with a narcissist isn't winning an argument or proving them wrong. It's reclaiming your peace and self-respect. Here's the final thought I want to walk away with you. Ego words can be more than noise. They can be the key to your freedom. When you speak with clarity and courage, you strip away the narcissist's power and light your own path to peace. So remember this, practice it. Own it. And when the moment calls for it, say it loud. loud and clear, not just to them, but to yourself. Because the moment you say, oh, I see through you and I'm not afraid, you are no longer a victim. You are the author of your own story. What happens after you say that one sentence, I see through you and I'm not afraid, is where the real transformation takes place. It's not just about the words themselves. It's about what those words do to the entire dynamic between you and the narcissist. See, narcissists build their entire identity on illusions and control. They construct a narrative where they are always the center, always in charge, and always untouchable. When you speak that sentence, you're essentially pulling the rug out from under them. You're removing the very foundation they rely on, the belief that they have power over you, into why this sentence works so well. First, it breaks the mask. Narcissists hide behind a carefully crafted image, whether it's charm, victimhood, superiority, or vulnerability. This image is their armor. It protects them from being seen as flawed or weak. When you say, I see through you, you're acknowledging that you recognize the mask for what it is. You're telling them you know their tricks, their manipulations, their false narratives. This acknowledgement removes their invisibility cloak and exposes the truth beneath. Second, it shatters the illusion of control. Narcissists need to believe they control your emotions, your thoughts, your reactions. This belief fuels their sense of power. But the moment you say, I'm not afraid, you're telling them you're no longer their puppet. You're not dancing to their tune. This declaration strips them of the control they crave. They realize that the emotional reactions they've depended on no longer exist. Without those reactions, their power diminishes. It's like if you're playing a game of chess and suddenly your opponent stops responding, the game loses its meaning. The narcissist's game is emotional manipulation. When you stop playing, the game ends. Another reason this sense resonates so deeply is that it combines insight with emotional strength. Not just saying, I know what you're doing. It's also saying, and I'm not going to let you hurt me anymore. This combination is a double blow. Insight alone might make a narcissist uncomfortable, but emotional resilience is what makes them truly afraid, because it shows you've reclaimed your power. You're no longer vulnerable to their tactics. Philosophically, this taps into a profound human truth of power often lies in awareness and detachment. When you become aware of the forces manipulating you and detach yourself emotionally, you gain freedom. Narcissists fear this freedom because it undermines their entire existence. They thrive on dependency and control. Break that, and their world collapses. What's fascinating is that the sentence doesn't need to long or complicated. It's succinct, but it carries a weight that disrupts the narcissist's carefully balanced system. This is a lesson in economy of words. Sometimes the most powerful messages come in the simplest packages. But there's more to why this sentence is effective. It's also a boundary. Boundaries are critical in dealing with narcissists because they communicate limits clearly and without ambiguity. Narcissists try to blur boundaries to keep you confused and compliant. Saying, I see through you and I'm not afraid, draws a clear line. It says, this is where I stand. This is what I will no longer tolerate. Establishing boundaries doesn't just protect you. It also forces the narcissist to confront their own limitations. They either have to respect that boundary or escalate their behavior. But because you've already declared your emotional independence, escalation becomes less effective. Your calm presence becomes a barrier they can't breach easily. It's important to emphasize that this sentence isn't about belittling or humiliating the narcissist. It's not about winning a fight. It's about reclaiming your space and your sanity. When you say this sentence, you're choosing yourself over their chaos. You're prioritizing your peace over their drama. In practical terms, delivering this sense requires confidence and clarity. You don't need to shout or show anger. The power lies in the calm assurance that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to be manipulated. It's a moment of quiet strength that reverberates far beyond the immediate interaction. Imagine the impact on the narcissist's paish. They've spent so long weaving their web of control, only to have someone look right through it and walk away unscathed. That realization can be devastating for them. It forces them to question their methods, their identity, and ultimately their power. So what do you do after you say it? You don't chase after explanations or arguments. You don't need to justify yourself. You simply hold your ground and maintain your peace. That's a real victory. Remember, the ultimate goal isn't to destroy the narcissist. It's to free yourself, to step out of the cycle of manipulation and reclaim your life. This sentence is your tool. Not to harm, but to heal, to attack, but to assert, not to provoke, but to protect. In the end, what makes this sentence so transformative is its ability to collapse the narcissist's world of illusion and leave them face to face with reality, a reality where they no longer control you. And that reality, it's the beginning of your freedom. So when you find the courage to say, I see through you and I'm not afraid, know this, you're not just speaking words. You're not dismantling a fortress built on fear and deception. You're reclaiming your power and stepping into a new chapter of strength and peace. Because true power isn't taken, it's realized. And it begins the moment you refuse to be controlled. And let's explore something that's often overlooked when we talk about narcissists, how deeply they depend on you. Yes, you for their survival. This might sound strange at first, but it's a fundamental truth out. Narcissists can't exist without their supply. And that supply isn't just admiration or compliments. It's your emotional energy, your attention, your reactions. Think about it like this. A fire needs fuel to keep burning. Without fuel, it dies out. The narcissist's fuel is the emotional response they provoke in others. When you get angry, confused, scared, or even impressed, you're feeding their fire. The more intense your reaction, the brighter the fire burns, and the more powerful they feel. So the question becomes, how do you take away that fuel? How do you extinguish the fire? The answer lies in something surprisingly simple, but incredibly effective. Jugu refused to give it to them. B, But refusing isn't just about ignoring or avoiding. It's about consciously choosing not to engage in the emotional games. It's about recognizing that your emotional energy is yours alone, and that giving it away to someone who uses it to control and manipulate you is a loss you don't have to accept. Narcissists thrive on chaos because it creates emotional reactions. They provoke drama, create conflicts, and sow doubt because these reactions feed their ego. If you respond with calm, steady presence instead of emotional turmoil, you deny them that feed. You become a desert in the storm of their manipulations. Dry, unyielding, and uninviting. This is not easy. The instinct to respond, to defend, to explain, to argue is powerful. But when you break that instinct, you break their power. There's a psychological term for this: narcissistic supply. It's the attention and emotional energy narcissists rely on. Without supply, their self-image collapses. They become vulnerable because the facade they've built is no longer supported. Philosophically, this touches on a profound concept, the sovereignty of your own mind and emotions. It's the idea that no one can control your inner world unless you let them. This sovereignty is your true power. Now, how does this look in real life? Imagine a narcissist with a provocative comment at you, trying to bait you into a fight. The instinct might be to fire back, defend yourself, or call them out. But instead, what if you simply acknowledge the comment internally and then do nothing? No emotional reaction, no argument, no validation. At first, this might confuse them. They're used to getting some kind of emotional response. When they don't, might escalate or try different tactics. But if you remain consistent, their attempts will lose steam. They'll realize their usual tricks aren't working. This consistent refusal to feed the narcissist's fire isn't past an active choice, a form of emotional self-defense that requires awareness and discipline. It's saying, I control my energy. I decide where it goes. Here's the kicker: the less fuel you give, the weaker the narcissist becomes. And when they become weak, their real self, vulnerable, insecure, afraid, starts to show. This is where the power dynamic shifts. It's also important to understand that this doesn't mean you have to cut narcissist out of your life immediately or completely, although sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes you have to interact with narcissists, family members, colleagues, or others. But even in those situations, you have control over your emotional engagement. You can choose to interact without giving them your emotional supply. That choice is revolutionary. It frees you from being a victim of their manipulation. It puts the power back in your hands. Philosophically, it's an affirmation of your autonomy. It says, my inner world is mine. I will not surrender it to someone else's control. So, what's the takeaway? If you want to make a narcissist fear losing control over you, if you want to reclaim your peace and your power, you need to starve them of their supply. Refuse to react emotionally to their provocations. Refuse to chase their approval. Refuse to get drawn into their chaos. When you do this consistently, you don't just survive. You create a boundary so strong that the narcissist's influence weakens and eventually disappears. And here's the most important thing to remember: your emotional energy is your most valuable asset. Protect it fiercely. Give it only to those who deserve it, and never to someone who feeds off your pain or fear up, because the moment you stop feeling their fire, the narcissist's power begins to fade and your freedom begins. When we talk about facing a narcissist and making them fear you forever, it's easy to focus on words, tactics, and psychological maneuvers. But what often gets overlooked, and what might be the most profound form of power you can wield, is something internal: your unwavering self-worth and boundaries. Here's the truth: narcissists target those who doubt themselves. They prey on insecurity because insecurity makes you vulnerable and malleable. When you don't believe in your own value, you become easy to manipulate. Your boundaries blur, your voice weakens, and your confidence cracks. This is their playground. But what happens when you build yourself from the inside out? When you cultivate an unshakable belief in your worth, something shifts in the dynamic. You're no longer a target. You're a fortress. Building this kind of self-worth isn't about arrogance or superiority. It's not about thinking you're better than others. It's about knowing your value so deeply that no one else's opinion or behavior can diminish it. It's about holding a clear, firm line that says, this is who I am, and I will not allow anyone to diminish me. Now, why does this terrify a narcissist? Because their power depends on shaking that very foundation. They want you questioning yourself, doubting your perceptions, and constantly seeking their approval. When you stop doing that, you dismantle their control. Think about it philosophically. Your sense of self-worth is your inner compass. It guides your decisions, your emotions, your reactions. When that compass is strong, external storms, even violent ones, cannot redirect your course. You're anchored. And boundaries, they're the map you draw around your compass, marking where others can and cannot go. Without boundaries, you're open terrain. But with boundaries, define your space, you protect your peace and communicate what is acceptable. Narcissists hate boundaries. Why? Because boundaries limit their access. They restrict their ability to manipulate and control. When you enforce boundaries consistently and without apology, you send a powerful message to you will not be moved or shaken. It's important to understand that setting boundaries isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous practice. Every interaction with a narcissist is a test. Will you stand firm, or will you let the line blur again? That's why cultivating self-worth and boundaries is an ongoing journey. It requires reflection, self-compassion, and sometimes tough decisions. Do that. But every step you take in this direction strengthens your foundation and weakens the narcissist's hold. Here's another key insight: your self-worth isn't dependent on external validation. It's an internal state. This means you don't have to wait for anyone, especially not a narcissist, to recognize your value. Recognize it yourself. You honor yourself. You protect yourself. When you operate from this place, Interactions with narcissists change. You become less reactive, less vulnerable, and more grounded. You don't need their approval, their attention, or their recognition. You have your own. And this leads to an unexpected but crucial point. Narcissists fear loss of control, but they fear even more the loss of their illusion of superiority. When you embody genuine self-worth and enforce firm boundaries, you shatter that illusion. You show them that their status, their manipulations, their games mean nothing to you. In this way, your self-worth and boundaries aren't just defenses. They are weapons. Not weapons of attack, but weapons of protection and empowerment. Imagine standing in front of a narcissist, not with anger or fear, but with calm confidence. You hold your ground with dignity, knowing your value and saying without words, I am home enough. You cannot hurt me. That presence alone is a force that most narcissists cannot withstand. It breaks their cycle of control and manipulation. It strips them of the power they thought they held over you. So, what's the takeaway here? If you want to make a narcissist fear you forever, don't just focus on what you say or do externally. Do that, invest in the internal work of building your self-worth and setting unbreakable boundaries. Because the strongest armor you can wear against a narcissist isn't a clever sentence or a strategic move. It's the knowledge of your own value and the courage to protect it relentlessly. And here's your call to action. Start today. Reflect on your worth. Define your boundaries. Stand firm even when it's hard. Every time you do, you take a step toward freedom. Freedom from manipulation, from fear, from control. Remember, when you truly know your value and defend it fiercely, you become untouchable. That is the one thing a narcissist will always fear. And that, ultimately, is your greatest power.